So I'm going to simplify a very confusing set of laws regarding hemp extract. The biggest thing that people were aware of was the fact that the cannabis plant was on the Controlled Substances Schedule 1 list, making it as illegal as heroin. And so that was a case of the baby being thrown out with the bathwater. So in 1970, the plant was added to the Controlled Substances Act and made illegal. But there are two ways to think about the plant. One is the version of the plant that can get you high, and the other version can't get you high. And they never intended to prevent people from using the version that can't get you high, but it was simpler to just make the entire species, the whole plant, cannabis, illegal, even if it was the version that cannot get you high. So the version that cannot get you high is called hemp, and the version that can get you high is called marijuana. Neither term is a technical or scientific term. The only scientific term is cannabis. So the cannabis plant today that cannot get you high, called hemp, is, as of 2019, completely legal in terms of the laws that the Drug Enforcement Agency enforces, which is the Controlled Substances Act. So now this is no longer a concern when it comes to hemp, cannabis containing less than 0.3% THC, such that it cannot get you high. That is, it is non-psychoactive. So this is now checked off as something that the industry does not have to worry about or even understand any longer. FDA law is significantly more convoluted and difficult to explain and nuanced with several categories. So we're going to talk about three of the main categories to understand and be concerned about with respect to hemp and its derivatives and FDA law. The first we title here GW Pharma. What that means is that there is a rule within the laws that the FDA enforces, and the two major sets of laws they enforce are the DSHEA Law, Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act of 1994, and the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. So within their laws that the FDA, as policemen, so the DEA are the policemen of these laws in the CSA, and the FDA are policemen of other laws. So they don't make the laws, they police the laws. And so this aspect of the code that they enforce relating to GW Pharma essentially means that if the FDA has approved for significant clinical trials or given a new drug status to a substance, then that same substance, which is approved as a drug, cannot simultaneously be sold as a food additive, a food, or a food supplement. And so the question then is, since GW Pharma was given a new drug status for Epidiolex and another product made from CBD, which is one of the primary phytochemicals or cannabinoids within the cannabis plant, can anybody take hemp, which is now legal to grow it and sell it, can they now pluck out the CBD molecules and sell it as a food supplement, or a food additive? The answer is no, they cannot, because that substance, CBD, was approved as the active ingredient in a pharmaceutical applied by GW Pharma, and there will be others. There will be other drugs derived from this plant as well. How about this question? Can someone sell a full spectrum extract of the hemp plant, which means you pull out the fibers and you pull out the waxes and lipids? Can you then sell that substance as a food additive or a supplement or a food? And the answer is yes, you can. So when one hears statements by the FDA that, which are true, that you can't sell CBD, they must understand that legally, okay, hemp extract is not CBD. For example, you can go to walmart.com and you can find on the shelf a product by many manufacturers, for example, Now, and they make supplements. And there's a plant called the white willow bark tree, and you can, or the white willow tree, and the bark of this tree contains a high percentage of a chemical called salicin, which is the drug ingredient in aspirin. And so that's approved as an OTC drug. So can you pluck salicin out of white willow bark extract and sell it as a supplement? No, you cannot. Can you do what Walmart does legally, which is they sell white willow bark extract that contains a meaningful quantity of the drug salicin naturally occurring? Yes, you can. Can you highlight the fact that it has the drug in it, salicin? Yes, you can. Of course, you can't make drug claims about it, but salicin is a drug when it is considered by the FDA to be in isolation. So just as with the example with Walmart selling white willow bark extract that boldly brags the milligram content of salicin in the bottle without violating FDA law, one can take full spectrum hemp extract, which contains a meaningful amount of CBD, and they can put CBD prominently on the label, and they can sell it without any violation of this aspect of FDA law. You just can't do it with the isolated CBD, because that would not be a full spectrum extract. So we check that off as being legally compliant if a company is selling a full spectrum extract of the hemp plant. The next category is NDI, which stands for New Dietary Ingredient. So there is a list that the FDA keeps for supplements. So if you find some new herbal product in the forests of the Amazon and you want to bring it to America and sell it as a dietary supplement, you cannot do that without it being on the NDI list that the FDA maintains. However, there is one exception, and it relates to the letter N in new. So what defines new? New dietary supplements are substances as dietary supplements that were not in the food supply prior to DSHEA being signed by Clinton in 1994. So what about cannabis extract? Was full spectrum cannabis extract in the food supply prior to 1994? Indeed it was. In fact, for over 120 years, cannabis extract has been sold in America and advertised in places like the Sears and Roebuck catalog. This cannabis extract was in some cases called by a popular name in a different language, which is called hashish. So hashish is a full spectrum extract of the cannabis plant. And again, it doesn't really matter whether it has this or that ratio of the naturally occurring phytochemicals such as THC or CBD, because every single strain has a different ratio. The two dominant ones tend to be CBD and THC. However, you can have some strains that have virtually no THC and some strains that have very little CBD. So this full spectrum extract, aka hashish, has been sold in the United States for about 120 or so years and advertised prolifically at various periods within that time. So well before 1994, it was readily available to American consumers in the food supply. So we would not even be able to apply to be on the NDI list because by definition, full spectrum cannabis extract, whether it is the hemp legal term, or it is the marijuana legal term, which is defined by the amount of THC, it has been available in the food supply. So we check that off. We don't apply to the NDI list. We would be in the wrong line. It would be like checking into customs when you go back into your country through the foreign visitors line. You shouldn't be in that line or on that list at all. So the last category is GRAS, which stands for Generally Accepted as Safe. So one must wonder, is cannabis extract generally accepted as safe? There are hundreds of clinical studies on the cannabis plant. Some of them are on extracts of the plant that are full spectrum. Others are on isolated molecules from the plant. And then there are studies on the smokable ingestion of the plant, the edible ingestion, and so on. And so with these many hundreds of studies, they all have safety sections. Some of them are animals, some of them are humans, some of them are in vitro. And there has never been a known death in the history of the country because of overdose of this plant or any of its subconstituent molecules. There's also a grandfathering in some sense where when something has been readily available in the food supply for countless decades, that it in some sense gets grandfathered in. So at this point there's a bit of confusion where some may interpret the law to say, well, even though it's been in the food supply for over 100 years and nobody's ever gotten hurt, and even though it's in countless mentions in the safety data section of clinical studies on this plant, one might still be able to say, well, the FDA still has to approve it as generally accepted as safe. That would be a very aggressive interpretation of the law. The purpose, the spirit, and intent of the GRAS process is to ensure that as new food supplies get permitted to be sold here and imported or created and grown here, we want to ensure that people are safe. So it is generally, the spirit and intent is generally for substances that have not been exposed at meaningful levels into the American diet. And that simply is not the case with this substance. So in some sense, a GRAS study is not necessarily called for within the spirit and intent of the law. And yet somebody should do it. And so our company is in the process of submitting a package to the FDA on behalf of the rest of the industry. But there is no enforcement action by the FDA. These hemp extract products have been sold in the market with full knowledge of the FDA for quite a long time, and they haven't taken any action with respect to the GRAS study. So it's not a very high priority risk at this point based on the FDA's policing activity. So again, police authorities have to use some common sense to fulfill their edict to protect the American public and how they navigate through the interpretation of the law, multiplied by their choices of resource allocation to police and enforce the law. And so with respect to the general safety of hemp extract, the FDA is simply taking no enforcement action at this point. So we give that a half check, right? It's not something major to worry about, and yet it's something that should be checked off in some sense, where the FDA can admit that a GRAS study is not needed because it's grandfathered in because of the long history of safety, or someone like us submits a safety data package and gets it kind of GRAS approved, green lighted on behalf of the whole industry. So that's cannabis law in a nutshell.